All right, we continue to get reaction now and get a sense of the impact that the announced tariffs by the US could have on various industries in South Africa. We now shift the focus to the automotive sector. We're joined by Automotive Business Council CEO Mikel Mabasa. Good evening, Mikel. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. So just this morning, the media space was littered with articles fearing the worst for the motor industry. But just talk us through the potential impact that these tariffs could have.
Thank you very much for having us this evening. Look, I think the impact of this tariff, we're still counting the cost and the potential impact without doubt, because you'd recall that South Africa currently is technically still cushioned as a result of the AGOA agreement that we have with the United States. Obviously, the jury is still out, and we're waiting, obviously, with bated breath to see whether these tariffs will also impact very, very directly that particular agreement. But effectively, for the automotive industry, very specifically, the 30% that was announced, this morning, South African time, by the American president, including the 25% that was announced last week, increases exponentially the vehicles that are going to be produced in South Africa and going to be sent to the United States. Which is obviously a very, very big concern for us as a sector.
Because we understand that the car industry accounts for 5% of the GDP and really essentially creates jobs for 11,600 people. So if we had to quantify this and look at the amount or the percentage that we export, do you have those figures on hand for us to almost get the context of how big an issue this could possibly be?
Yeah, look, I mean, currently South Africa is actually an export-driven automotive industry. 66% of the vehicles that we produce in South Africa today are actually exported out of the country, which means that we're actually producing more vehicles for the world than we actually produce for our own people. We're currently exporting to 148 different markets around the world, and the United States is one of those particular countries. And we are very proud that South Africa is one of the leading markets that can be able to have that prowess and the expansion of markets, not just only in Europe, but across the world. 148 markets is a very, very big number of markets that we are currently exporting vehicles to. As it relates to the United States, if you look at 2024, we exported about 25,548 different units into that particular market, which constitute around 6.5% of the vehicles that we've produced in the country in 2024.
And most certainly, given that duty-free access that we had, it was quite beneficial or profitable for the country and our industry. So what should happen now? You've got the Trade Ministry saying perhaps there needs to be follow-up engagements beyond this point. Do you think it's important that they expedite these talks as a matter of urgency now, given what it looks, how it could possibly impact this industry? Should it happen immediately? And also just assessing the address from yesterday, because it sounded as though the US president was amenable to have further engagements with any of the countries.
Absolutely. I think there's no need for us to procrastinate any further. I think urgent conversations needs to be held with the United States very, very directly. From the automotive industry perspective, we are already having a meeting next week, Tuesday, in Washington, D.C., of the International Organization for Automotive Manufacturers across the world. We are meeting in D.C. to be able to look at some of these challenges that we're beginning to see, as per announced by the president last night. But I think what is important for us is that South Africa this year in 2025 is in a very, very advantageous position because we are hosting G20 this year. The world is coming to Johannesburg. We now need to take an opportunity and see how we can be able to leverage this very advantageous position that we find ourselves in, so that we can be able to bring the world in one room and see how best we can be able to put pressure on the United States together in order for us to be able to navigate this current impasse, because it's not just affecting South Africa, but certainly many other markets around the world.
Most certainly, we must use it to our advantage. You indicate that you'll be heading to Washington to have these conversations, but one wonders, where do you start with these conversations when the facts on the table are still a bit sketchy here, because we've been talking to the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and they're still a bit confused and baffled by the 60% that South Africa is reportedly imposing on products from the United States. So when you go into those engagement rooms, where do you start when you are not even armed with the figures for you to go in there and say, let's transact, let's have a conversation, but we don't have the facts? How was this calculated?
Absolutely, and I think the first place to start, I'm a transport economist by training. The first place to start is absolutely to understand the formulas that were used to get into these particular calculations, because we've tried, to understand these calculations for the best part of today, and we've been battling to really understand how they got to those calculations. And I think that conversations that we're having definitely next week is really to better understand how they got to this calculation, what is the meaning of reciprocity as defined in the communication that they sent out yesterday, so that we can really be able to make sure that we're able to respond accordingly based on the formulas that they've used in their calculations.
Mikel, thank you very much for joining us this evening. That is Automotive Business Council CEO Mikel Mabasa talking to us there.